over to our hosts. And again, thank you all for joining. Great. Seeing a slow trickle in at this point, up to 64 folks, 65, and I think we'll see a slow trickle continue, but I think we are good to go. And just wanted to say thank you everybody for joining lecture 3 of Motoko Bootcamp. This one's about how to use DFX to deploy canisters, and it's grateful for having it hosted by Matthew Beekman and Dan Ryan of IC Pipeline. So I'll hand it over to both of them. They can give you a little bit of background on themselves and what they're building on the IC, and then we can jump right into the lecture before a Q&A. So thanks all. Excited to jump in.
Thanks, Artia. I guess I'll go first. My name is Dan Ryan. Very much like Ted, who did such a nice job earlier. I've been in the tech space basically since forever, and in the IC ecosystem since right around the time of the Internet Computer Genesis event. I just wanted to mention, just as a matter of housekeeping, this video includes 1 or 2 references to skipping ahead and so forth. It will be apparent that we figured folks would be watching this independently, which obviously is not the case. So I'm afraid you're stuck with us for the moment. And just for context, I'll say that this presentation is through the lens, so to speak, of recalling our own experience of getting up to speed in the IC ecosystem, kind of scratching our heads as we sorted out the end-to-end of deploying and managing canisters and life in general in the IC environment. So to the extent that we may have ended up with a little less emphasis on straight up step-by-step direction, perhaps the QA may serve to address any such gaps. I do hope you find it helpful. And with that, I'm going to hand off to my friend and colleague, Matthew, who's also my partner in IC Pipeline, joining us today. Take it away, Matt.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Artia. Dan kind of covered everything from the high level. IC Pipeline is a project we've been working on. It's probably also important to note we've received a few grants from the Dfinity Foundation and the Developer Grant Program, which I encourage folks to check out. People at Dfinity are really just plain wonderful, and we're enjoying the education that we've, in essence, learned through getting our hands dirty and reading all the documentation and things that came along and grew as the internet computer grew. And again, as Dan said, this will hopefully help you because it's content that honestly said we wish we had at the beginning. So with that said, unless Dan, you have something else, I'll hit play.
Yep, let her roll. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And on to full screen this. We'll come back after the video's done. It's about 20 minutes, 26 minutes, it looks like. Enjoy. Thanks.
Greetings and welcome. Greetings and welcome to today's brief discussion about DFX, or the DFX Canister SDK, and how we use DFX to deploy canisters on the internet computer. Here we'll assume you've already installed DFX, that you're up and running with it. We'll assume you've already seen Seb's excellent video for installation and setup. That's titled Set Up Your Environment for Building on the Internet Computer, and you can find it in the Code and State YouTube channel. We'll try to focus on the practical side of actually getting canisters deployed. Without ranging too far afield here, I'd like to take a minute on how DFX manages itself on our local file systems, handles its own versioning, and so forth. It's good to be aware of this stuff, which can definitely trip us up if we don't know it. The installer snippet that we've all now used actually curls a bash script, which does the actual management of the DFX installation. The core DFX binary installs locally to user local bin, and its support libraries live in our user home folders inside the .cache subfolder. The installer adds a Definity folder to .cache, and inside that it creates subfolders for your specific versions of DFX. The current DFX version as of this presentation is 0.12.1. This whole ecosystem is pretty bleeding edge, so DFX evolves fairly rapidly. So the DFX upgrade command, which works very nicely, is our friend. DFX is generally pretty smart as far as managing multiple versions of itself on our machines. We can optionally define a project's DFX version in that same DFX JSON file. As with Node and other tooling, as dev timelines can extend, versions may diverge, which can cause headaches if it's not handled. So DFX is good this way. Nicely done by the Definity team. And lastly, I just add that we here and Seb's setup video reference specifically the pre-built binary install of DFX. DFX is open source, and we can roll our own if we prefer or if we need to customize, but that exceeds our scope, and compiling from source is probably farther down the road for most of us here anyway. So diving in, let's touch on identity and how it plays into canister creation and our project deployments. The IC insists on knowing who we are when we interact with it, and that's a good thing. Most folks, myself included, start out by running the cookbook for the Hello Starter project. That, of course, leaves us with this identity called default, essentially a byproduct of our very first canister create. DFX needs an identity to do that, which it automatically creates on the spot. That default identity tends to stick with us, and that's very much the norm, the expected behavior. Internet computer identities are public-private key pairs. Identities are key pairs, period. When we run DFX identity new, followed by that username, that name value is strictly local. It's a human readable handle for our convenience and of course our sanity when managing multiples of them. I think it's worth noting that, while we tend to have an identity with the name default, and we do tend to default to using it, it is just another identity, just a key pair like any other. We can hop over to the DFX command line for some identity fundamentals, which DFX makes really easy for us to do. DFX identity who am I? That works just like who am I on any Unix system. DFX identity list shows all my identities. With DFX identity new, we can easily create as many identities as we need. We'll call this one Mobo Test 1 for Motoko Bootcamp. We can switch to using Mobo Test 1 with DFX identity use, and then we can switch back to default before removing Mobo Test with DFX identity remove, and we'll end up back where we started. I recall initially wondering about what's local versus what's network with regard to my identities. I guess that's residual hangover from Web 2 engineering. But the best way to look at this is an identity is an identity, which is a key pair, which is inherently unique. And that, as they say, is that. You get comfortable with it pretty quickly. Each identity also has a principal, which is synonymous with its public key. The principal identifier, that dash delimited string value, which, like that name/handle, is actually just a manageable string derived from the public key. Algorithmically speaking, it could only have come from that public key. And the public key itself is derived in turn from the private key. So while it's an oversimplification, it's not wrong to think of the public key/principal as a username and the private key as a password. And by way of that sequential derivation piece, they're bound together in ways that regular arbitrary username password combinations are not. Locally, our identity related assets are stored in home/.config, which is not to be confused with .cache from earlier. Each identity's private key lives in a folder named for its name, and identities having cycles wallets associated with them also have wallets.json, which we'll look at more closely in just a few. As with any operating system, any relational database, or what have you, in all our interactions with DFX, and by extension with the Internet computer itself, we are acting as a specific identity at any given time. I note also that the IC's digital signing scheme is baked into this layer. All our DFX communications with the IC, be they canister related or otherwise, are digitally signed with our identity's private keys. So the IC knows A, that we're really who we say we are, and B, that our messages haven't been tampered with in transit. I'll bite my tongue and leave it there, but this is one of the many things we could talk about all day, and I'm not even an expert. With that, let's move on from identity, since we're keeping this brief within reason. Let's talk now about using DFX to handle tokens, wallets, and cycles. And I'll tell you, this is a topic I really could have used a leg up with when I was first trying to get my brain wrapped around this. It's definitely one of those things that can seem harder than it actually is. For sure, you can skip ahead if this seems redundant with where you are on the curve, but I know I initially ran through my share of cookbooks without really connecting some underlying dots. And also, we want to be as inclusive as we can. Anyway, let's have a go. The Internet computer, as many, but perhaps not all of you know, runs on a reverse gas model. That means that rather than requiring our users to pay on a per transaction basis, we, as builders and entrepreneurs, fund our own canisters, which removes that, call it, pay-per-click burden from our users, our customers. So in that light, reverse gas is a really big thing, really essential to the mainstreaming of Web3, the blockchain singularity, as it's called. So, canisters run on cycles, which we get by converting ICP to cycles. While many of us will have used Dfinity's cycles faucet to get us started, in the longer run, this means we're going to be needing some ICP at some point. As I referenced earlier, this can seem like a friction point, particularly for those of us more interested in the tech side. It kind of seems like a lot when we start stringing all the words together. But DFX makes it really pretty straightforward, and much more so when we have basic command of the outlines of the thing. So we fund our own canisters, essentially using the blockchain's native coin, ICP, as the medium of exchange. But there's an inherent wrinkle in the day-to-day market volatility that all cryptocurrencies are subject to. I take my $20 or my 400 pesos or my 120 odd yuan and I convert it to ICP today, and that amounts to how much tomorrow? In essence, it's the same reason why, 10 years later and counting, we still don't buy our Starbucks with Bitcoin. It's because crypto just doesn't really work that well, not yet anyway, as a unit of exchange, as money in the sense that most people think of it. So in order to be able to purchase services today and consume them tomorrow or whenever while receiving a reasonably predictable return, we need a unit of exchange whose value is stable. The Internet computer accomplishes this with cycles. When you convert $20 worth of ICP to cycles today, your cycles are still worth $20 tomorrow, irrespective of whether the ICP coin price has moved up or down in the interim. And again, by all means, skip this part if you're bored, but I find it really interesting. The value of cycles is pegged to a globally recognized unit of value called SDR, or special drawing rights. SDR is not actual spending money, but rather what's called a basket currency unit created by the International Monetary Fund based on what they consider to be the 5 leading world currencies: USD, Euro, Yuan, Yen,
and the UK pound. Its usefulness is based on its stable, predictable value, which is equal to roughly $1.40 American. I actually first encountered SDR in a business that did loads of international shipping and logistics stuff, where value needs to traverse borders, jurisdictions, local currencies, and what have you. Anyway, 1 trillion or 1T cycles is always worth 1 SDR, which is to say your 1T cycles is always going to be worth that same $1.40, give or take. I apologize if I sound chauvinistic, but as an American, I just tend to think in dollars. So, nearer to the business at hand, we need cycles. We get them by converting ICP, which obviously starts with us having some ICP. By the way, all of this is much more pertinent to deploying to the actual IC blockchain, not so much when working with local replica environments. In terms of ownership or holdership, we should note that cycles are never directly associated with a personal identity or principal. Cycles are only ever held by canisters, and this leads us to the necessity for cycles wallets, which are in fact a type of canister. A Cycles wallet is a canister that has been enabled for holding and transacting cycles. This is accomplished with a generic WASM or compiled module of WebAssembly code, which is specifically built and published for this purpose. We can push that WASM to a canister, et voila, the canister is now a Cycles wallet. We'll walk through that in just a moment. I should also mention that when we work with DFX in local replica environments, in other words, not on the actual blockchain, this process is all happening more or less, but DFX manages it kind of invisibly, where your local projects each get a faux cycles wallet and the faux cycles are moved around automatically. To me, that's significant in terms of the general integrity of replica environments as our building and testing platform, that it works essentially the same way as the real thing. And just real quick, I would point out that Cycles wallet controllership is distinct from canister controllership. There is a wallet controller role, and there's also a wallet custodian role, which is a lower level admin role specific to the wallet function, distinct from the canister itself. I'll just take a moment or two here to kind of walk through the real life process. I'm just trying to offer practical advice for folks who may be new to this, where this part can be a bit of a speed bump, or so it seems to me anyway. So for these purposes, let's say we've just acquired some ICP. Let's say we bought it on Coinbase. That's arbitrary since Coinbase is just one exchange where ICP is listed. But we have some ICP, which at the moment is in our Coinbase wallet. The coins are ours, but they're still sitting on the exchange. They're in a non-custodial wallet that the exchange has provided for us. To convert these ICP to cycles, we must first move them to our NNS account. That is basically move them off the exchange and into the IC ecosystem. Once our ICP are in our NNS account, they're accessible to DFX, which we can then use to do what we need to do. There are plenty of resources that will walk you through this process in detail, but we'll just go through the broad strokes. Again, feel free to skip ahead. So generally, you'd use two browser tabs, one tab open with the NNS DApp as the receiving end of your transfer. The other tab is at the exchange's site as the sending end. You log into the NNS DApp using your internet identity, and you fetch and copy your NNS account ID to your clipboard, and you switch to the other tab, paste that NNS account ID into the exchange as your send to address. You are moving your ICP from the exchange onto the IC ledger. That incurs a very small transaction fee. While these fees are really too small to hurt, they do sometimes get in the way of using simple round numbers. In other words, you can't just say one ICP worth from end to end because the arithmetic comes up that fraction of a penny short. So you have to just do a little arithmetic there. It's no big deal. I'm just saying. You confirm the transaction on the exchange and you're all set. You now have some ICP in your NNS account. And next, you'll want to convert some or all of that ICP to cycles so you can use the cycles to fund your canisters. In some cases, you won't even need to explicitly create a cycles wallet. It's great when stuff is easy automagic, but it can also have the effect of obscuring stuff you need to know. So let's walk through it. We're going to convert some ICP to cycles using a brand new cycles wallet in this case, which we'll create using DFX. The process outline is basically this. We're performing the actual conversion of ICP to cycles. That is to say, we are minting cycles, which are actual tokens on the blockchain. We're launching a canister that will hold those newly minted cycles. We're going to enable that canister to act as a cycles wallet, again by loading that wallet WASM into it. We'll designate our principal, our user principal, as the canister controller, and we'll designate this new canister as our default cycles wallet. The beauty part is that DFX takes care of the whole thing in a couple of commands, which we'll look at momentarily. I'll do this with a couple of slides. The first of these two sequential commands, and again, we already have ICP in our NNS account, which we've moved over from the exchange where we first acquired the ICP. The first command goes like this, and we can read across, working left to right. DFX ledger denotes that this is a ledger command. Network IC means we're working on chain, not locally. Create canister obviously means we're creating a canister. Principal identifier is the user principal that will be the controller of this canister. And amount is the amount in ICP tokens that we are converting to cycles. So that first command, assuming we haven't broken anything, will return this messaging which confirms the particulars. Note the canister ID of the canister you've just created. That's going to be your cycles wallet, but at the moment it is just a canister that is holding cycles. This canister is not an operable cycles wallet yet, which we address with this next command. And you see the messaging there that says creating a wallet canister. Wallet being the operative word there. The canister was created by the previous command, and it's that follow-up command that not only makes it a wallet, but your wallet, assuming that is that the principal you used is a personal identity of yours. And with that, you should be all set. You use these two commands to verify what you've just done. First, using DFX identity to confirm that you have in fact created a wallet and connected it to your principal. And then your balance in cycles of that wallet using the DFX wallet command. DFX wallet balance. We can go ahead and run the DFX wallet help menu here. As you can see, the subcommands list is a combination of things relating to actually using the wallet and other things more related to administering the wallet. Generally speaking, DFX is pretty smart in terms of accessing our wallets when we're in our building workflows. For instance, in most cases, we just need to make sure we have cycles in our wallet. And then when we run DFX deploy for a given project, DFX will know who we are, and it will just go ahead and draw the necessary amount of cycles when we DFX canister create or DFX deploy the project on network, that is, for the first time. There are also more explicit ways of doing things. We don't have time to address them all comprehensively, but we can walk through one or two real-life type examples, which we'll do now. Here we have a simple demo project, just a copy of Definity's Hello Starter project. DFX is running now, but we have no canisters created. So I asked for my canister status. As you can see, there are no canisters. So we'll take a look at our dfx.json file. We see our canister definitions in DFX JSON. And when we enter DFX canister create all, DFX knows what to do based on those canister definitions. This is just working locally, and so it's very simple. Next, we'll do a by accident on purpose here, where I'll run the exact same command I just ran, except this time specifying network equals IC, and you'll see we get a fail because my cycles wallet is not sufficiently funded with cycles. And of course, DFX is our Swiss Army knife here, which we can use to rectify this and any number of other situations. I mean, do bear in mind that this is just one arbitrarily picked real life type use case to provide a sense of doing stuff like this. Nowhere near comprehensive here. So anyway, first we'll use DFX Ledger to check the balance in our NNS Ledger account. Mind you, this is our account balance in ICP, not our wallet balance in cycles. Then we'll fetch the canister principal of our cycles wallet. And then finally we'll use the DFX Ledger top-up command, which will pull the specified amount of ICP from our NNS account, which in this case is just half of one ICP, running low at the moment. It will convert that to newly minted cycles, and it will drop the new cycles into my cycles wallet. Give that just a moment. This is a mint transaction on the IC ledger. And there we go. We've just topped up our cycles wallet with what should be enough cycles to go ahead and create the 2 canisters needed for this basic project. In truth, we're actually cutting it close here, but I think we'll be okay. And having done that, I should now have sufficient cycles in my cycles wallet to create the 2 canisters required by this simple boilerplate project. You may notice that I've exposed some data here, my wallet principal primarily, which is something you wouldn't normally broadcast to the world. But as you see, it's virtually empty, and I'll be replacing my cycles wallet right after this. And there we have it. And DFX is great for day-to-day care and feeding type tasks, verifying canister status, start them, stop them, delete them as needed. By the way, that's something to bear in mind. It's really quite easy to end up with stray canisters that we've basically forgotten about. So in addition to just common sense housekeeping, they're out there, exposed to bad actors, sniffing for code vulnerabilities, DOS attacks, what have you. So that's something to keep in mind. And when we should need to add cycles to our canisters, we can do so very easily with canister add cycles. We'll just go ahead and add a very tiny amount to a canister here. Give it a million cycles, which is in fact a very tiny amount. That's another thing, just like that you kind of get used to, like a trillion cycles, 10 power 12 is a very large number, which conversely at less than $1.50 per trillion means that cycles are extremely small units. Okay, that's going to do it for today's introduction to using DFX to manage canisters on the IC. As I'm sure you noticed, we tried to fill in some potential blind spots and hopefully clear some of the weeds that cropped up for us when we were getting started. Obviously, we all remain on the same learning curve, as we shall for the foreseeable future, and I hope that this was helpful to you. We'll look forward to connecting with whoever wishes to join the real-time conversation that we'll have to follow this up. Thanks again for watching, and we'll speak to you soon.
Awesome. Dan, thank you for showing that video. And now that the lecture is over, we will kick off the Q&A process. Dan and Matthew, on your screens, you'll see there's a pretty vibrant list of Q&A questions populated already. I think there are maybe 10 or 11 that are open. So if either of you have the time to go in and answer some of those typed, that would be great. But we're also opening the stage for attendees to raise their hands and ask live questions. So we can invite you onto stage, ask your question, and either Dan or Matthew can answer them for you. And I guess the last thing I'd say is I think one of your cameras weren't working, but if you want to make this a little bit more personal, feel free to turn on your camera and chat directly to folks. And with that, we'll transition to Q&A. So kick it off.
Awesome. Thanks, Artia. I guess we should just read these pretty much from the top going down. Matthew, can you see the list now?
Yeah, it's on the share, and Artia, happy to turn on the camera, but I think you're blocking it on the host side. At least that's what the message says.
Got it. I'll let you know if we're able to sort that out.
No worries. So going backwards in time, you want to do that? So 1209, anonymous attendee.
Yeah.
I have DFX.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Take it away. Okay.
I was just going to read it.
Anonymous attendee asks, I have DFX installed on my system, but every time I close the terminal, I need to effectively, Anonymous effectively needs to re-edit his or her bash RC file. I guess that's to manage the DFX alias at the command line. You got anything for that, Matt, or does anybody else? Obviously, everybody feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, I think it says the question's been answered live, but if it's that it can't actually find DFX where you type DFX, like what is it that you're adding to like pick up the bash RC? Because you might be using Z shell, which on Mac, Z shell, so there should be a
.zshrc.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. It's basically, it's a different, you'll have both in your home directory. So I think I'm still sharing, right? So,
yes.
Cat bash RC. So in here, there's some stuff that runs when you launch bash, but there's also a Z shell. So you might want to check and make sure that whatever's in your bash RC needs to go in your Z shell RC. That's just a guess. All right, let's go back to the list. So identity that you are capable to use with local instance of the IC and the actual mainnet 2. Or do I have to make new identities to interact with the local and IC? So you end up with one key pair that Dan was talking about. And so when you're using an identity for the local, it's actually using the same public private key pair as it would when it interacts with the mainnet. They are two separate internet computers, if you will. There's an internet computer running on your laptop, like a small little one inside what they call a replica. And then there's the big mainnet one. They act the same way, so your identities will actually work the same way for either one. It's just the -- network flag that tells DFX which internet computer to connect to.
That's a good way of looking at it. It's a good question. That's why I kind of touched on it, because I was scratching my head along those same lines initially. Your identity is a key pair. Your key pair is unique. It will work either way. I mean, that's not to say that as a matter of your own personal, housekeeping or what have you, you don't want to use different identities for different purposes. By all means, do so. But there is no box, as it were, around a local versus a network identity, if that helps to clear it up for you.
Okay, cool. Any clue why DFX deploy command would get stuck in a building front end, but when the identity changed to default, it works without any issue? Well, I think somebody threw in here that it might be looking for a passphrase for one identity. Might have been created without a passphrase, and the one that you change to default doesn't have a passphrase, so that might be where it paused. That's the best guess. It'll sit there and hang, just like Denny says. Wait for the passphrase independently. That's a guess as well. Could you please name some use cases of custodian and controller role?
I would
That was
say
when you were talking about the wallet, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, those are wallet specific roles, and as I mentioned in the video, that's the main. Like you've got a controller role in a assigned principal, one or more designated principals who are the controllers of that canister. But there's also a wallet controller role. I know that's not your exact question here. In terms of use cases, I'm exact use cases. I would rather say that I think of the wallet controller role as more connected to doing things having to do with administering the wallet, adding and removing other controllers, listing and assigning custodians of the wallet. But in terms of day-to-day usage, I would say the wallet controller is about administering the wallet, whereas a wallet custodian has basically full use of the wallet as such, send and receive tokens, checking balances, things like that.
Yeah, Dan and I actually sorry, go ahead.
I'll chime in after you answer the question fully. My apologies.
Cool. Yeah, no worries. So that another epiphany along the way is that the wallet is not actually a separate thing on the internet computer. It is another canister, just like the canister that might be part of your Hello project, or eventually the app that you want to build on the internet computer. A canister is a canister is a canister, and that the wallet WASM that Dan talked about is something that Dfinity has built to manage cycles and help you manage cycles, but it's just another application. It's just another D app, like the one that you might build, and that D app gets deployed into a canister. The custodian of that D app is in the program, right? The wallet has a thing called a custodian, and that custodian, as Dan said, can do these things with the wallet, top it up, etc. And that the controller is the same as a controller of any canister. As Dan said, it could, start and stop it, and basically manage the infrastructure that is the canister. So a controller for a wallet is the same as a controller for your D app, whatever that might be. I don't know if that helped clarify some more too. Artia?
Thank you, Matthew. Just a couple administrative points. One, you should be able to turn on your video, so we enabled that if you're comfortable. Two, I was gonna ask Dan if you don't mind going back to the title, the title slide, just so folks aren't staring at a black screen.
And
sorry
about that.
No, all good.
Discussion about DFX.
All good.
Good.
And
There you go.
3 is when you're answering a question, if you just don't mind mentioning. Next question is from Christian Salvador, for example. And
Gotcha.
otherwise, thank you so much. Continue.
Yeah, thank you. So I hit share video or start video and then it keeps stopping.
We can see you now.
Oh, you can. Okay.
You're
I
good.
don't see a picture in picture. So yeah, the next question is from Christian Salvadora. Is it doable to have a multi-sig wallet or ledger? The ledger and the wallet are two separate things. The ledger, that is the ICP ledger, is a canister that is controlling all ICP, everybody's. You can end up making your own ledger, and in that software, make it require a multi-sig connection. I'm not an expert at that type of stuff, but I do believe that there are folks, it might be Tonic Labs or potentially others that are trying to build and have potentially built what would be called a multi-sig wallet, but I'm not going to claim expertise there. I don't know if anyone else has input on that, but I believe, yeah, here we go. IC Devs recently announced that Axon V2 includes a multi-sig wallet capability. I know what it is. I don't know if I know how to talk more about it though. Thank you, Wenzel. The next question will go to from Denny: how to define a staging environment running on mainnet, or is there even a better way, like using a test net? Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. That's a lot of the use case and the space that Dan and I noticed was, an opportunity. IC Pipeline is that we're working on is building out environments for teams to share their applications and test and do product development, et cetera, without having to deploy it to the mainnet. There is no test net at the moment for the internet computer. And even if there ended up being one, it still would be one test net, just similar to the test nets that are available for Ethereum and some of the other blockchains.
I would say,
remember,
go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Matthew. I apologize.
Oh, it's all good.
I would say, just in terms of the broadest of broad strokes, IC Pipeline, you should think of in basically in terms, the vocabulary of continuous integration and delivery, CI/CD, the ability to create on-demand both replica environments and also do pre-prod stage deployments to the mainnet blockchain, if that is your wish. Like the ability to create what we call a stage tier in IC Pipeline is optional if you want to have a pre-prod deployment that is not on replica-based infrastructure.
Yes, we'll be giving a presentation at the end of the boot camp on what we've been building, but at the moment there is no test net. I believe the boot camp, everyone's going to be deploying to the mainnet. You should understand that when you deploy to the mainnet, it is available to everybody. So I'll give you a quick anecdote. The first thing we built was a mailing list capability, and it kind of hit us after we had collected a couple mailing lists that the method was available to everybody to get a list of all the people that had added to the mailing list. That was built as a demo, and we were, again, educated, but it was on the mainnet and it had an open interface, which, obviously is not what you want to do. And if this was, something that wasn't just a demo, it would have been a bad thing. So how do you test for those things? And the internet computer is a growing space that a lot of the things that might be available in your traditional software development lifecycle are in the process of being invented. So there lies an opportunity for you as well.
I would also say that I would also say that developing on replica environments has has to do with a lot more than just whether or not there are one or more test nets for the blockchain. I'm speaking entirely subjectively here, but to me, testnets are great vehicles for testing and versioning the blockchain itself. But because a testnet is still another blockchain, no less public, no less monolithic than the mainnet, for developing software platforms on the blockchain, testnets are not as good of a fit, in my view. That's partly subjective. Anyway, we'll move on from that. HG asks, he points out, or they point out that on the Dfinity forum, sometimes a clean start is recommended as a fix, and it's recommended that you recursively remove your project's .dfx directory, which is a subdirectory in your project. What does this resolve/reset for a locally deployed canister? .dfx is essentially DFX's entire configuration for your project. So by removing that folder, you're effectively rewinding to before you first deployed the project. And I'm sure that Matthew can expand on that.
Yeah, well, it's everything Dan just said. It includes things like your canister ID files, but it also included, and they've changed this recently in 12, all of the state that is in the local replicator or a local replica. And the local replica, again, is think about it as a mini internet computer, and .dfx held everything that was that internet computer, including the current state. So what I mean by that is, let's say you launched your application, and your application had a form field that took in a text string and it stored it. So I add a form field, or I add hello, and I hit save. That stores it in state, right? There's now an application that has, this piece of data in it that I want to keep. That needs to be saved somewhere or managed somewhere. The replica is actually reading and writing to your hard drive in the .dfx folder. As of 0.12 of DFX, they've actually moved all of the state data into a shared location in the root of your home directory. And that's a much longer story that we can get into, but the recommendation as a fix, starting clean with a -- clean on the DFX start. DFX has a bunch of built-in things where it goes through and cleans out any leftovers, so that, as Dan said, this should be as if you never deployed anything. As that DFX application has grown over the last few years, let's just say that it wasn't always as nice as it is now, and it's still a 0. version, right? Where they haven't called it version 1 yet. So as those versions go along, and as I might have moved from 0.8 to 0.9, or even 0.8.1 to 0.8.2, there might have been leftovers, right? There's a file that was in this version that's no longer being used, and it's causing a conflict. This is just a way to clean house.
Hey, Matt, Dan, I just wanted to do a quick time check, since we've got about 10 questions left and about 10 minutes till the top of the hour. So just want to make sure I set expectations, but thank you for that answer.
I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Artia. Okay, reading on. At NFT Collection asks, so every time that we need to change between canisters, we need to start and stop, or can we just do like we did between identities? I would say, think in terms of context on this question. In other words, you can start and stop any canister if you identify that canister by principal using DFX. However, in terms of using terms like canister all or canister hello underscore front end, whatever the case, using a canister's name handle and referring to it that way. All of that will flow through the DFX JSON file in whatever project directory you are in. So in other words, if you're switching, if you want to talk to the canisters for project A, and you want to change over to managing canisters for project B, CD into your project B directory.
Just the canister ID as well, where the canister ID is basically been aliased through DFX JSON. So if you called it hello front end in DFX JSON as a canister, and you type, the DFX installing software that you install software into. And just like you might turn a virtual machine on and off, or a Docker on and off, and give it a different IP address in the Web2 world, all of those can be parallelized into canister management. I don't know if that helps. Let's see if we can get a couple more here before the top of the hour. Jump into Denny again. Is there a way to provide a Denny passphrase as an environment variable, or something different that could be better handled manually in a CI/CD pipeline? Yes and no. You in essence can manage it the same way that you could any password required at a bash shell or shell scripting basis. It's then gets into like where you're storing that passphrase. Again, it's a couple steps deeper, but just think about it as if you were, pushing, and you might do some good searching on, how to inject a passphrase into a SSL certificate, while you're doing a web server launch, right? There's conversations about that in the CI.
Is asking specifically, oh, I'm sorry.
Sheeta, I have created a new encrypted ID. I can locally deploy, but on chain, I'm unable to deploy the front end, only the back end. Well, the fact that you can do one and not the other, it's in essence the same action. The front end, you should be aware that it injects the demo, and then it uploads assets. But that might also run an NP package manager step that's taking place before it uploads. You really need to take a look at the output that's coming on screen, and maybe share that in the Discord forum, and see if you can get some help here. Tip 88, nothing to do I know this has nothing to do with the lecture, but I think it's interesting to try and grasp. Every user that visits a canister gets assigned a sub-account ID anonymous user ID. And automatically creating wallets for users in the background seems wild to me. Tip 88, I'm a little confused as to directly to the question, because it sounds like you're conflating a few things. So let me try to break it down a little bit. A canister isn't assigning sub accounts or anonymous user IDs. It can, if that's the software that you put, or the smart contract, and that's what you built to actually have happen. But if you're talking specifically to, say, a sub account having to do with the ledger, the ICP ledger, a account ID on the ICP ledger is actually derived from a principal, and you can get a principal by using the internet identity. You can get a principal by installing a wallet, where then the wallet would have a principal, and then the wallet would allow you to interact with the ledger. There is another layer below that you can add sub accounts to a principal account, if I'm saying it correctly. There's folks that I know a lot more about this and can say it better, but I'm not sure if I actually answered what you were asking. Doing my best to kind of translate that, but it's two separate things. Somebody comes and visits a canister, they're not actually handed a anonymous ID. If they're visiting a canister using, let's say, the JavaScript SDK, the JavaScript SDK is baked with a anonymous principal. So as that client, whether it be a web page or node script or whatever, but that JavaScript client is actually talking to the canister using an anonymous principal until you give that user principal either through internet identity or by some other means. And again, as you said, it's not necessarily this lecture. It's a deep rabbit hole that would take some more clarification. Answered that one. Master Dude, we kind of touched on that.
Matt,
I think we're at the top of the hour, though.
Just a quick note, if I know we're just at the top of the hour here. We can choose a few more final questions, because I think people are finding this quite valuable. If either or both of you are able to stay over, we're happy to keep this open longer and we can get through more questions. It looks like there are about 5 more.
Okay.
Sure,
Wayne
happy
says,
to
can you
stick
please
with it.
answer the question, Wayne, above? That one seems to have disappeared.
Yeah, I'm
Does that
looking for
answer?
Zane. I don't see it.
Zane, here we go. Oh, here we go. Zane, what's the best approach to safely sharing identities across devices when working with a team? Well, it's if you want to share identities, it's just like you're sharing any sort of secure certificate or security protocol. You can share the actual private key files, and then you would have to share the passcodes if you added passcodes to them, so that everybody could use. Because I could give you my private key file that's inside of my identity folder, and you could use it unless it has a passcode on it, and then you would need my passcode. So you can do that, or you build in such a way that, which would be better, that each individual gets their own, creates their own identity, and then the canister, if you need everybody to be able to control that canister, you can add multiple identities, multiple principals as controllers for the canister. But it's really best practices that you would do with anything else, right? If it was a database and Dan and I worked together and we both needed access to that database, best practices would be to create a user for Dan and create a user for me. And even if there is an administrative user or super user, even if we both had those credentials, we would still log in as our individual users. And then that way you can track it. You could, if for whatever reason people move off a project, you can remove it. Anyways, I could spend a whole bunch of time on that, but hopefully that does it. We'll go back to the beginning. What's the difference between a wallet custodian and a wallet controller? Oh, I think we touched on that already, tip 88. Again, custodian is in the software. Controller of a canister is a controller of a canister is a controller of a canister. Anonymous attendee. Will an empty cycles wallet expire after a prolonged period of not being used? A canister is a canister is a canister. If a canister runs out of cycles, because a wallet canister is going to actually be burning cycles while it exists. So the longer it exists, the more cycles it will continue to burn, and it will have a finite period of time based on the number of cycles before it reaches a point to where it would stop responding from messages, and just like any canister. So I don't know if that's a direct answer, but yes, they can expire. Tip 88. Is there a way to deterministic? Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to take tip 88.
Go for
it. Tip 888 asks, is there a way to deterministically figure out how many cycles are required for a canister to run for, say, 10 years? Is that even technically possible to figure out, given the costs of function and storage calls? I think your second question there is a very big piece of the answer to the first question. I don't know of any way to say, well, how many cycles is a given canister going to chew up over the course of a month, much less 10 years, because so much depends on how much of a footprint there is in terms of activity and processing overhead placed on that canister. That said, some members of the community have done some really, really good work as far as doing some load testing and building some data that basically helps us to get our heads wrapped around this. So we're not just kind of hanging out there in space as far as that goes. That's collectively being handled by the community. Matthew has a screen up right now that has some really good information. And even in addition to this, there are some really good resources out there that if you know, Google is your friend as far as this goes. But some folks have done some really good work. Go ahead, Matt, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. I threw a link into the chat for this thing. This page has a whole bunch of, you know, costs that, as everything Dan said, it will be really dependent upon your application. And you can start to do this type of math. You know, some of the cloud providers, like say AWS, they have cost calculators. As Dan said, there's folks out there that are working hard to try to turn this into a calculation. But you can get a general sense from the data there.
There was one person in particular who did really good work. I forget what her name was. I'm going to take a look right now.
About. I can't remember.
Let's keep moving.
Yep. HG, do we have to roll out our own equivalent of identity account management IAM provided by the cloud providers? Are there any best practices, design patterns for this need? We've touched on it. You know, for those that don't know, IAM is a AWS identity management service. You can create users and keys and both for programmatic access as well as user access to dashboards and command line SDKs. There's a lot of effort being done to build some of these things. IC pipeline and the stuff we're doing is part of that effort. It's in progress, and part of this boot. But then what you can bake into your application to manage access to the application and the services, whether that eventually becomes an API service or an Oracle service or a financial service. So hopefully that touches on it. Does canisters can be accessed with minimal or without latency differences across the world? The internet computer is global. The internet computer has has services all around the world. When you deploy your application, it deploys that application into multiple server farms, but multiple node providers based on the subnet that you're in. And what'll happen is it'll have a minimum number of canisters, and I might be getting something wrong here. A lot of the stuff's in the white paper and some of the deeper levels of how nodes are moving canisters around. But if I understand it correctly, if I have my application and I deploy it, and let's say most of the users are in the United States, I will have enough canisters running on the nodes in the United States. But if all of a sudden somebody from China starts using my application, the internet computer will actually launch another canister to service people closer to China. And there is a Web 2 layer, right, which is basically brings you to a border gateway, and then the border gateway brings you into the internet computer, and those border gateway endpoints are around the world as well. So you kind of think about that as a CDN or content delivery network for the internet computer. The latency should be the same if the internet computer is and becomes everything that it wants to, right? So at the size and scale that will be the internet computer in its prime, let's say, there should not be any latency differences around the world. But today, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see until somebody says something that they don't like it, and I'm sure then we'll be working towards building stuff closer to them and or managing it. Do some testing, come back with some data and say that you're good or not.
Hey, just to jump back to that question about usage costs, which I mean, that is a meat and potatoes question, if ever there was one, trying to get a sense of what am I in here for cost wise. The person whose name I couldn't recall is Hazel. Hazel is a brilliant person and super cool and generous, who has added so much value by doing this legwork doing and sharing this work on behalf of the community. I posted a link to some of Hazel's work there that Artia has shared with everybody. But remember that name, Hazel. because you can pay attention when Hazel says something.
Yeah, her group is working on a payment system. Is it Quark? I don't know if someone remembers. I think it begins with letter Q, but a payment platform, commerce platform.
Yeah, it's Quark. I'll add a link here shortly.
Quark, yeah. Checked it out. When they were launching their beta, their aspirations are large, and we like that.
And the product looks incredible.
Yeah, it's they're doing good stuff. Okay,
Well,
so
that's the kind of project that breaks new ground for all of us to follow in. I mean, payment processing. You talk about blockchain singularity, mainstreaming the work that all of us are doing. I mean, talk about the cutting edge of it right there. So,
yeah, and how all that
Yeah.
connects. Dan and I have spent all of that data is being collected during the commerce transactions that we all do. And getting that into this decentralized privacy protection, my data is my data is my data. There's a bunch of people chasing that, not just in the internet computer. Folks might be aware of the Brave browser. This goes back to the very beginning of the internet, where being able to empower people with their own data. That all starts with the commerce, which again, what they're chasing is really cool. Yes, Quark. Well said, guys. Wenzel, Bartlett, if I decided to change computers after working on development projects with various identities and wallets, what specific files and folders need to be transferred to the new computer? So Dan mentioned it in his lecture, but there's let's just do a little show and tell here. So inside of your home directory, there's a config file, folder, and inside of the config folder, there's a DFX folder, and this has your identities, and this DFX folder, I haven't specifically tried this of that. Each one of those folders, use Homer, which is not a happy thing. DFX identity, sorry. It's not Homer. And inside there's my PEM file, and there should be I never did a wallet with Homer. There'll be a wallet's JSON, which will actually include the ID. And I believe, Wenzel, if you were to copy that DFX folder or even the subfolders of the identity, if you wanted to cherry pick out each one, it would then act the same way on the next computer.
I think so too. I would say in generally, when it comes to
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of folks spend a lot of time talking about what it isn't, it being the internet computer, and again, take it with the grain of salt that you want. Dan and I have been at this for decades. Some folks that may have met us already, but like we met in the late 90s when the internet started, or at least when the internet started really becoming mainstream. For those that remember what a 56K modem was, that's about when we entered this space. And watching that migration from dial-up to broadband, broadband to server farm to cloud, cloud to internet compute. And I don't know, folks, the fact you're in this conversation and you're interested in this, kudos to you. Best of luck this week. Keep questions thrown into Discord. There's lots of people excited about this platform and globally, and even more people willing to help you. If you can formulate the question, you'd probably find somebody who will answer it. So anything else? Dan, are you good? Think anything else?
I am good.
Yeah, I think that covers it. And before ending the call, I just wanted to thank you all for joining, and thank you, Matt, Dan, for everything you've done for the IC community and for contributing this lecture to Motoko Bootcamp. But I don't see any new questions, just a lot of thanks, and we'll see you all soon. Sorry, I think I got cut off there. Should be good to go though. Thanks everyone for joining.